Partnerships and relationships.
We can see that line.
So we're here with Iain McCaig, a very well-known illustrator and film person and concept designer. And he's brought out the Shadowline book. I understand that you got a paperback of this book.
Comes out at Christmas of this year, finally.
Which is wonderful. So you and I first came across each other at Glasgow School of Art, and you were studying graphic design and illustration.
And so who are you, in 3 words or less?
Yes.
I'm an artist. Actually, I had to do that once. I had graduated from Glasgow School of Art, gone down to London, and I called my favorite agency and I had my speech prepared. Hello, Iain McCaig. I am a graduate of Glasgow School of Art. I want to be an illustrator and a film concept designer, though that wasn't a name back then. And at which point I heard the leave the message after the beep. Beep. But I just said my whole speech. So all I could mumble was, I want to be an illustrator. Oh, and then I hung up. All they needed was the gunshot, you know.
So at what point did you sort of take off into film concept type work?
3rd year.
3rd year?
Yeah, my parents went back to the States. I stayed to go to art school, but they went back to California. And in 3rd year for the summer, I went back to see them. It was a life-changing summer. I thought I would get a job doing something like, you know, film design. So I opened up the phone book, and there it is, film studios. There's never been a section like that in a phone book before that said film studios. So I started at the letter A, and I just cold called. And by the time I got to the letter K, I got an interview. And I went along and showed them my artwork and asked if I could get a job as an animator. And they went, these aren't animations. I went, oh, yes, sorry, I left those in Scotland. And they said, okay, we'll just go upstairs and animate for an hour, and you know, if it's good, we'll hire you. So I went upstairs, and for the first time in my life saw professional animation equipment. I'd only ever done flip books, but they must have liked it because I became their head animator for the summer. And I did Sesame Street cartoons, the letters A, E, and W.
A, E, and W, Sesame Street.
Changed a lot of lives.
That's wonderful.
So then I went back to Glasgow, and they did offer to let me stay and help, you know, as one of their lead animators for the movie they were going to do, which ironically George Lucas financed. And I counted, and I thought, well, 2,500 pictures, that's a few minutes of film. 2,500 paintings is a career. And so I went back to Glasgow, and I graduated, and then I went down to London, and I started my 10 years there as an illustrator. And my 2,500 paintings.
If somebody was to put the name Iain McCaig into Google, there are, you know, many hundreds of thousands of hits. They can click on radio interviews that have been done of you. They can read your bio, they can check out your blog, they can do all sorts of things. So what we thought we would try to do here is to get you to talk around 3 different things that we haven't quite come across information of, and which you have generously shared with our students over the week that you've been at COFA. The first of those 3 is on creativity. And it's very interesting to watch you in a workshop teach students. You use a number of different skills. One of the things that you have done, I heard you say in the workshop yesterday, was you turned to someone and you asked them for an idea. And they came up with probably what was an obvious idea. It was at the front of their mind. And you said, flip it. Where does that come from?
From an old animation trick, actually, and illustration trick. You always work with a mirror by your side, as partly so you're never lonely, and also so you can make all sorts of funny faces and draw it. But more importantly, that when you're done your drawing, you can hold it up to the mirror and flip it round. And once you flipped it around, the mistakes become glaringly obvious. I think it's partly because we read from left to right in the, you know, in places I came from, and so you're used to tracking across a page in a certain way. If you flip it, it breaks you out of that way of seeing, and you suddenly, the faults really jump out. Wonderful. Yeah, they say that you dump most of what you see. What you pay attention to is what is different. And that's because you need to quickly assess, is it something that's going to kill me and threaten me? Is it something that I can use to my advantage or whatever? So it pops out and you evaluate it real quick. So yeah, same in a drawing. When you see something that's really different, it tends to pop out at you, and the mirror helps to do that.
You do something even more interesting. You use it as a drawing technique, but you use it as a thinking process, because you also turned to the people in the workshop and said, what's the opposite of that? Reverse it now. Spin it on its head. Yeah. And give us an example of how you might have used that in your own work.
Spinning it on its head. They say that you can turn any film into its opposite. So if you were writing a comedy, you could turn it into a horror film. Very easy, just don't laugh. You know, or do laugh, but then have something horrible happen. And so just that small twist, taking a classic tale and turning it into a science fiction story if it was a love story, or Beauty and the Beast I think we did once, and we turned it into a dark futuristic film noir. And it's just like The Mirror, but for story. And it kicks you into a whole different way of seeing characters that you've become sort of blasé to, and even dumped most of what you know about them, and it comes back all fresh and alive. You know, you can practically just do that by making the main character a woman, because I would say 75% of films are about men, you know, and it's nice to sort of remember the other half of humanity. And so, yeah.
I can hear all the women in the audience watching this cheering in the background now. That leads beautifully into my next question of you, which is something else I've noticed in your work. In creative thinking, it's a technique called bisociation, which started in the 1950s. And you and I had a chat about this yesterday. So if you hold out your hand to me, and you spread your fingers, and you say, you've got these 5 ideas, and I say, I'm George Lucas, I've got these 5 ideas, and we map our ideas against one another, we're combining 2 very different perspectives, and we're coming up with something new. Where do you think using that technique originated in your work? Because if I look at your early drawings, it always seems to have been present.
When I was a kid, 14 years old, my parents left home. I was living in Canada. I had a great group of friends. We were putting on plays, making movies, doing crazy stuff, and I didn't want to leave, so they went back to the States and left me in a big house all by myself. They wisely left me with a Bullock 60mm camera, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and an Underwood typewriter. So every week I made a radio play, every month I made a movie, and I wrote Pulp Fiction by the ton. And I think that because I was involved in radio plays and movies since I was 14 years old, the idea of you're not the only creator is just part of my process. I like the bigger brain. I like the stuff that comes out of throwing it out there with no ego and matching those fingers together. So I've always done it. And maybe that's where it comes from. It's just that group effort of making films and radio plays.
You're remarkably disconnected from any personal investment of your ego in your process. Does that come from your work in the film industry, where sometimes a director or producer is, if you like, kind of running the show, and you are submitting ranges of work to them?
I think the worst thing I can think of in the film industry, amongst the many worst things that are there, is when it says a blank, blank, blank film, fill in the name of the director. The best is what they put at the front of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It says a film by a lot of people. You know, and it is. It's not any one person's film, and the director isn't, I mean, if they're driving, the driver isn't a better job than being the engine, or being the wheels, or whatever. It's just, their job is to pick and choose, and they decide which way the car is going. But without the car, they wouldn't get there. So, no, the ego thing, where does that come from? I think it's because there's a higher good. You know, no matter how I feel or what I want, it really doesn't matter, because it's all about serving the story. And I love stories almost more than anything. Yeah, a good story can change your life, can make you transform as a person, you can pack your entire moral code into a story and live by it, and it just reminds you. It's like a piece of music, where you listen to it and you reset, and you're suddenly you again. Yeah, whoa, that did it. I feel like me again. Yeah, so that's...
You've talked in the past about sources of influence being quite important to you, Norman Rockwell and others at art school. You told me a fantastic story about the moment where you, if you like, you closed up the books of the masters. What happened to kind of turn around your perspective on people who influenced you and then your own vision?
Yeah, that was the story where I was always, when I first started, and before, had all my heroes around my desk. And my heroes back when I was a American student was Frank Frazetta, Norman Rockwell, and James Bama. And these days people don't remember James Bama, so I have to remind them it's the Doc Savage guy with the torn shirt and the big muscles.
Wonderful.
Yeah, he's awesome. And still alive and still painting. But he ran west and started painting cowboys and Indians, and they're amazing. So anyway, I had those, but then at 18, we moved over to Scotland. And back in the 1970s, people didn't really know who Norman Rockwell was. Actually, there wasn't a lot of things back then, apart from the obvious, like computers and stuff. We didn't have art books. The title concept artists didn't exist. So I went over there and I couldn't find my heroes anymore, and I had to rediscover them. And all you had over there were people like Arthur Rackham, or John William Waterhouse, or the Pre-Raphaelites and so on, or Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And so I found them and I started bringing them onto my desk. Then by the time I began working, Rockwell revival had started, and I could buy his books and put them around the table. So really my table was this mesh of books and my drawing board. And if I ever wanted to know how to draw something like someone's left shoe, I'd flip through and find Rockwell's left shoe that he did and go, yes, that's how it feels. And I'd do my left shoe. And I was painting grass. And I was flipping through the Rockwell book trying to find a piece of grass. And I looked up over the top of the book, and outside on the lawn there was a lot of it. Just lying there, waiting to be drawn. So I ran outside with a sketch pad and I lay on my tummy and I drew the grass. And when I came back in, I put the books away. And I've never, ever had a drawing book open while I've been drawing again. And I think that's just, you go back to the real thing. And nervous as you feel, much as you think that maybe someone's done it better, no one will ever do it like you. And putting the books away is the only thing that lets you do that.
So you have sources of influence, that is other people whose work you may have admired. There's also the original creative input of the things that you look at. And you have probably the broadest range of interests of anyone I've ever had the pleasure of having a chat with. You know, one minute it's dinosaurs and the next minute it's fairies. But you have talked a bit about the kind of patterns of certain things that you've revisited in your career over long periods of time. My question is not so much, I mean, you've referred to Alice in Wonderland, the love of dinosaurs, the love of fairies. Yeah. Why is it that you think you continue to revisit certain things? What does it do for your creative process?
What's the through line? Yeah, that puts them together. Well, you find there's a section right at the very back, the last chapter of this book, is all those things. Because the way I learned to draw, and I've told this story before too, but yeah, in here is all the things I really love and loved as a kid. So I was 4 years old, and really hating the children's books I had because they were very simple Mr. Cube and Mr. Circle drawings with happy faces on. But we had these dinosaur cards, these Brooke Bond T dinosaur cards, and they were so realistically painted and so just real magical creatures. And I sat and I copied the Brontosaurus on the front cover over and over and over again until I just, by rote, I could draw it perfectly. And then I went to school, and the next year, kindergarten, they handed out in those days it was a brown sheet that was blank at the top and had lines at the bottom. And they said, okay, now divide this into 3. In the first one, draw your mother. So I drew the stick figure with the triangle. And they said, now draw your house. So I drew the box with the smoke coming out the top. And then they said, draw your pet. And I didn't have a pet. So I drew my Brontosaurus. And then as I'm drawing this, the room goes really quiet. And I look up and everybody is standing all around me, and I think I'm in trouble, and then the teacher goes, wow. So I ran home and I learned to draw this guy. Yeah. Why? I don't know. Probably because it was the next most realistic thing. And then came in the next week and drew it, and everyone went wow again. So I ran home and I learned to draw Sean Connery. And so there's this weird line that in my mind is all the same thing. Otters, Sean Connery, Frankenstein's monster, Brontosauruses are exactly the same shape. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. There's the same rhythm and heart inside them. And I just did that for a year. And at the end of the year, I could draw 365 new things. And all of a sudden, you can put a couple of them on the screen together, and they're acting. And the next, before you know it, you're drawing and telling stories. So that's how I started.
Wonderful. Do you notice patterns, when you say that fairies have been quite important to you, or Alice in Wonderland as a story, and the way that continuing to revisit the drawings that you do for Alice in Wonderland act almost like a touchstone to your own creative practice in other projects? Yeah. What kind of patterns have you noticed in the way that you work?
Patterns. Well, it's funny because I did the Desert Island Discs in Melbourne last week, and hardest thing I've ever had to do. Choose 5 films, and amongst all the brilliant films that you take to a desert island with you. But with my final selection, the interviewer said, have you noticed most of these are about a character at a pivotal turning point in their lives? I went, no, I'd never thought about that before. And then I started going back, and Alice in Wonderland, a pivotal turning point in Alice's life, where she more or less went mad and entered her madness, her mad world. One of the films I chose was Casino Royale, because I used to be a big James Bond fan. But the scene I chose was the moment he became a 00. The moment he learned how to kill people and transformed into a machine. So yeah, I guess really that's why I called this book Shadowline. I like the place where things meet. I like where good and evil meet. I like where great change happens at that spot, great conflict, great all sorts of things. So that's where I choose to build my studio.
One of the things that I've observed in you over the years that we've been friends is that you seem quite fearless. And artists and designers often struggle with that. And there's been quite a lot of writing in the last couple of years that one of the biggest inhibitors to people who want to be more creative is a fear of failure. Often in a lecture or in a discussion of your work, you will say, I did all this work on something and it didn't come off, or that movie didn't get made, or I made this perfect character and the director didn't choose it and didn't decide to use it. Right. Where do you think that your resilience to the way that life beats us around comes from?
It's perception, I guess, because I don't see life beating me, right. And I don't feel like I'm resilient to it. The many hundreds of drawings that I did for the Darth Mauls that didn't get approved are still my drawings. They're still done. I still know, I judge whether they're good or bad. George Lucas's opinion of that will simply tell me which one was right for his film. But the other ones were all right in their own ways, and it doesn't matter what other people think, it matters what you think. So life feels more like a giant candy store. And all this opportunity, all these things you can do. Imagine being able to draw 100 or 200 images of the same character. Here, I was drawing your son, and every time he moved, playing the piano as opposed to wanting to be a teenage superhero, he became a new person. So it's my honor to sit there and just go, ooh, I want the chocolate one. Ooh, caramel's great. Just pull it in. I can't imagine getting tired of that, ever.
So the second section I want to talk to you about is about management, and by that I mean as kind of self-process management of how you go about your work. And you've talked about the kind of sources of influence and your resource, but you also talk about the need for time away from busyness and time for reflection and time to be still. You've described your own creative process. Tell me that analogy of using the juggler.
As I was showing people today in the story of the book, art supports life, not the other way around. I guess it is the other way around too, but mostly you don't want to get so buried in your work that you think your work justifies how you act out when you're not working. And so it's important to me to juggle the real world of a family and your loved ones and your friends and your obligations. If you teach or if you step on a public stage like this, you have a responsibility to the people that write to you, and because you put yourself out there. And so you should answer them. It's important. For all of us to continue to learn and grow, we need to teach. Because otherwise, how do you define the stuff that you don't even think about? By putting it in words and communicating it to another person, you've graduated to the next level and probably learned a lot from them too. So all those things are so important, and day's only that long. So the way I do it, my mom called it, for the big projects, poke a hole in it. So I'll grab the big one and as much as I can for a certain number of hours. And then I take that and I throw it in the air, because I know it'll stay up for a certain amount of time. And then I grab the next thing, and maybe this one I can actually just nail, and it's gone. And I throw that one up in the air, and now it's time to go down and play, go for a walk, have lunch. So I'll do that, and when I come back, I catch that first one, and I bring it and I poke another hole in it. And maybe now, before I catch the other one, there's something else that has to come in here. Sleep. That's the one I usually forget, sleeping and eating. And my daughter too, she's working away and she goes, why is my stomach sore? I didn't eat today. Or sleep, like last night when I was talking to your students. It's a whole other world, and I was lost in that world of these people that were just magical thinkers, so young and so able to critique and do it with joy and abandon and stuff. And why would you sleep? It was too fun.
Andrew Pinar, who you know from Pixar, who works in lighting, when he was presenting to the COFA students, he described his mind as being like a filing cabinet. And he said at Pixar he actually has a filing cabinet in his desk. And in it there's many, many photos and references of all different light forms and things, lights hitting objects. And he said, when I get stuck, I sometimes put my hand down to open the drawer, but sometimes I don't need to open the drawer. Just by visualizing what's in the drawer, it's enough to get me unstuck. And you said, when I told you that story, for you it's not a filing cabinet, it's a library. It's like a resource in your mind. Where do you restore your ability to draw on things? Where does that come from?
The library is stuff that I've drawn, and then it goes on the shelf, and then it starts to fade, as it should, right? Because the books are only there if you live them. They're not there if you remember them. If you remember them, you start to get the Reader's Digest version, and then you get the comic strip, and then pretty soon there's only a cover left. You have to read them over and over and over again, and then you have to add the new books up there too, all the time. So you asking how do I keep alive and excited and so on, that. I'm always constantly rereading, relearning, putting books on my shelf. And I guess the analogy of having a filing system where I know there's going to be this particular drawing doesn't work for me, because it's more like there's a giant library and the books that just went pow. And by going through and just knowing instinctively where things are, because I pull them out and look at them again, that's how I remember. And every time I do that act of doing it, it's fresh and alive.
So the third thing that I'd like to talk to you about is about story. And you, many years ago, took me into Skywalker Ranch and took me into the library there. And you started to talk about the work of Joseph Campbell, who I had not heard of. And you handed me a book and you said, well, this, is the hero's journey, and it underpins many of the myths and legends in many different cultures of the world. I came back to COFA, ordered all the Joseph Campbell books for the library here, and that idea of the monomyth has been carried through many of the different films that you've been asked to work on.
Of course, yes.
You said something interesting, though. You said that you feel over the last couple of years there's been a little bit of a shift, maybe away from some of those iconic forms of storytelling, almost into a kind of fun part. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, there's many different forms of story. When you get, Ursula Le Guin said that filmmaking was mechanical, and I thought, no, it's not. It's very organic. But I guess maybe compared to writing a novel or something, it is. It's mechanical in the way that poetry is mechanical. There can be free verse, but most filmmaking has a rhyme and a meter, and you fall within that rhyme structure. It's just as creative to work within the structure, sometimes more so, because you're not worried and you can play and all the rest. So the hero's journey in the monomyth was just a rhyme structure that not just I know that Disney adopted it, and then it came out as the writer's journey, which was the screenplay version of Joseph Campbell, and everybody seems to have adopted it now. But it doesn't work for every story, and not every story is about a journey to bring fire from the gods back to your tribe. Sometimes, as Ursula said, it's like a house, and there's the front door and it's open and it's kind of interesting inside, and so you wander in and you can wander around the house however you please, and by the time you get to the back door, either you never want to leave or you're so scared you can't wait to get out, and you rush out the back door, no stairs, you fall on the ground. So there's other structures and other ways of telling stories. Apart from anything else, the hero's journey is a very male hero's journey. Not long after it came out, another book came out called The Heroine's Journey, and it was a slightly different arc. So I guess it's like putting your heroes away, isn't it? Sort of start putting Joseph Campbell away and trying to find stories not from structures, but from things I've lived, things that I have learned.
This idea of a kind of theme park roller coaster ride of a story, which you've said sometimes leaves a too sweet taste in your mouth.
Yeah.
What do you think is the shift in the industry towards that type of storytelling?
Well, Spielberg said that in the old days, film studios were run by vaudevillian entertainers. They just stood up and by the seat of their pants, they tried to entertain an audience, and then they either laughed or they didn't. But it was the chutzpah of getting up there and doing it that really made the thing exciting. Now it tends to be run by people with marketing degrees, and it's so much money. It's up in the almost $500 million for some of the bigger films, and so people want to secure their investments. They want to lower their risk levels. So as a result, they fall back on formulas, they fall back on actors guaranteeing films, and then to their joy they discovered, this unpredictable thing called story, we don't need that anymore. All we need to do is make you feel things. So we need to make you feel boo! We need to make you feel we need to make you we just need you to do stuff. And they contrive moments. They literally call concept artists in and go, we need them to cry. So we come up with things that will make you cry, make you scared, and so on. And they start putting those in around, say it's Thor, not using Thor as an example, it's any cartoon character, you put them in there, and you build your film with these moments around some central comic book or anything, and that's enough. You don't need a real concrete story. It doesn't have to make much sense, it doesn't have to be believable, it doesn't have to have meaning even, and your film will have the right effect on an audience. I call those theme park films, and there's a sad number, growing number of those in the industry, usually with the mega budgets attached to them. And, oh, what a shame.
You said one of the things that you don't like about it is it makes you feel like you're a puppet and someone is pulling your strings and they're telling you to feel a certain emotion at a certain time.
Yeah.
If that's the negative, what's the positive? What's the antithesis of that?
Ooh, well, before I get to your antithesis, I just wanted to say, so you know how I went boo just then? So now later in the film, I really want you to be scared. So what am I going to do? Boo louder?
Right.
So it does become that kind of sugar high, where I have to do it bigger, noisier. What is it? They say make it louder and shinier. But at some point, you reach a point where the audience goes, I don't care. I totally don't care. So what's the flip side of that? What's the positive side? Well, in a weird kind of way, because that's distracting the attentions of the big studios, and they're glutting the market with things like that. For the lower budget independent filmmakers, they have this run of the playground now of films that used to be big studio films. Films really from the heart, films that are edgy, films that deal with things like child abuse and discrimination stuff in a way that big studio films can't risk. And so you get something like District 9 that comes out in the same year as Avatar. And there's Avatar, $350 million, maybe 500 with marketing in there, $500 million. Then out comes District 9 for $20 million. It deals with racism and discrimination and all kinds of things, and a transformation of a character from a jerk to someone you actually root for at the end. So I think that's the good side. It's left the playground empty, and I think the independent filmmakers get to walk in there and play.
You know, you will describe storytelling as having beats, and you talk about the rhythm, and you talk about crescendos, and you sometimes use the language of music. I mean, you're a wonderfully talented musician, apart from anything else. You've also described the influence that listening to music has on you whilst you're drawing. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It's hard. I have to have the right music for the right drawing, and for the right time of the drawing. So I have scary music for scary drawings, and I have relaxing music for relaxing drawings, and every once in a while I'll mix it up. I'll deliberately, if I want an annoyed look on someone's face, I'll play the wrong music. I did that actually on Harry Potter. There's Karkaroff. It's the big Russian headmaster, and I have a very grim side-on view of him, and he just looks in agony. It's because I was playing the most horrific music. And I'm trying to do this very classical looking man, and the expression then became very easy. So
if we look at a drawing like one of these two from your Star Wars period, what type of music might you have listened to? This is an interesting combination of influences.
Do you know the Himalayan voice music? They are.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was nice to be in a different culture, in a different world. That's the thing when you're designing other worlds. Very often you'll design different costumes and weird-looking creatures, and then they act exactly like they would if you go to the street corner. They're all the same. They say hello and they say goodbye the same kind of way. But really, if you go to a different culture and you held out your hand like this, you would have offended somebody, or that wouldn't be what they would do. So that was an attempt to try and bring into those two things something that was not my culture, something that was totally different. So immerse yourself in that other world. I guess if I could have made the right smells, made a Mongolian stew out of goat testicles or something, and that would have brought me into that world even more. But there is a point at which you stop being a method artist and just draw.
What do you think your students have taught you? You've had many of them in many different forms, sometimes big lectures, sometimes one-on-one with your apprenticeships.
Oh, lots. Oof. Encyclopedias, libraries full of things. I'll give you a real life one. Yeah, I think it was close to the time when you came over and you were in the life drawing room. And at that time I had read somewhere that everybody draws from the face down. And yet if you were building a building from the roof down, it would fall over. So it's a good exercise to try drawing human beings from the feet up. And that way you can do whatever you want to balance the body or throw it out of balance. And by the time you get to the head, it's like this fine-tuning control, and you can do anything you want with it. It adds all these nuances, just depending on how it tilts and so on the neck. So I went in and I proposed this theory to people that, no, we must draw from the feet up. And afterwards, a really great artist came up to me afterwards and said, I hated that. I hated that you said that, because you made it sound like the law. And I've tried drawing like that for the entire night, and I just don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable and so on. It says you must let people know that when you say these things, you're saying them as suggestions, not as something that they will be punished for if they don't do it. And I get very, very enthusiastic about a new thing I've discovered, and do make it sound maybe a little too much like a rule. There are no rules, you know that, right? There are only guidelines.
But what fascinates me about that is you and I have talked about content and process. And so there is the actual output of your work. You write scripts, you make movies, you generate concept designs, you do beautiful drawings, you create books. But you are an observer of your own process, so you do those two things concurrently. And in the lectures that you've given the students at COFA, you have shown how adept you are at that. It's as though you're up here, looking down on yourself. Do you think that that's something that you just have an ability to do, or have you watched other teachers who you had do it and have picked it up as a characteristic or trait?
No, I had some good teachers. I had some great teachers, but they didn't do what I wanted to do. So they taught me the stuff I needed to learn because I didn't know it. I already knew how to draw people and fantasy and all that kind of stuff. They taught me calligraphy, and they taught me design. And I really needed that, because all of this is designed. If you're an alien, come down looking at the stuff and don't know what those things are, it's just shapes. And how they read on that page is desperately important. So I have those kind of teachers. I remember, though, at the Glasgow School of Art, one of them forbid me to draw fantasy. Absolutely forbid me. You will never earn a living at this. I'm doing you a favor. And I painted that dragon. It was third year, and we had to suddenly, right in the end of our end of year, we had to paint our studio. And nobody wanted to stop their finals to do that. I went, I'll do it. So everyone went home, and I painted a dragon right around the room. And they painted it off the wall after the show.
Huge mistake.
Yes, but he called me. He called me after I won some fantasy award down in London and said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And I was able to say, no, you weren't. Yeah. It was important to learn to draw it without the wings and the horns. So thank you.
In going through your work, when you talked about drawing fairies early on, you then said you realized that you were always drawing old, craggy men in, Arthur Rackham sort of style. Then you said you wanted to really introduce women to that mix, and then there were children. And you are constantly challenging yourself. And so this content and process, it's also that you are continuing to critique yourself and say, you know what, I've done lots of that, but I've never tried this.
I think you have to always step out of your comfort zone. That's funny, doing that. There are a few times when I catch myself observing myself, and I always stop myself from doing that, always. You have to live it. You have to be there. So maybe I've just got better at pretending that guy is not there that's watching my process, but really I am. Yeah, but I definitely try to actually always be there in the moment. It's afterwards I find I had a complete snapshot and can look back at what I did. When I'm doing it, I am in the moment. Afterwards, I can go, now what did you do? And that's what I'm able to show to the students, because I find it's repeatable. It's a process. But every process, let's say we're drawing a face. Let's say we're drawing, let's see, that's not that face there. We're drawing this here. We see all these blank spots. I didn't draw the cheek line, the muscle coming down. I didn't draw the cheekbone here. But I knew where to leave it out, so that line is not just any line up the side of his face. There's his cheek, and there's where the bone cuts in. There's the orbital starting right there, and there's the bridge above the nose, and there's where the bone ends and the calcium starts. And all it is just a thought when you're doing that line, but you've got to know it's there. Yeah. So I find that processes are like that too. You leave a lot out. You do it so much that you don't think about the process. Why teaching is great is you go back and you remember, no, there's a cheekbone here. That nose has a plane, and that's why the shadow's hitting here and cutting across there. So teaching makes you put all the bits back in and stops the shortcuts from becoming meaningless. If I just did that long enough, I wouldn't remember the cheekbone, and it would just become a line. And how do you convey gesture and pose? Well, for me, the world changed a lot when I discovered Rudolf Laban. It was from a lady, Christine Els, who was a sculptor at Industrial Light and Magic. But she was also the director of this physical theater group downtown. And when I went to see it, there was just something extraordinary about the performances, above and beyond anything I'd seen before. So afterwards I said, so what was your technique? How did you get that out of your actors? And she said, oh, it's physical theater. It's what they use in Commedia dell'arte and so on. A person called Rudolf Laban created this language, this choreography language, so that you could actually write down in movements someone's mood and performance. And I had her show me, and it's just changed the whole way I work. I'll give you a quick example. The spine of a character is very important. When you're creating a puppet, bringing a puppet to life, first thing you do is give it a spine. Whether it's like this or like that or whatever, it puts an attitude inside it, right? And then you make it breathe. That's another thing. Check your CG characters. You can tell the ones that have elevated to a higher art because their characters actually breathe. You couldn't speak if you didn't push air out your lungs, and yet most CG characters are dead and don't do that. It's crazy. So in physical theater, the body leads you, or rather you're pulled from an invisible rope attached to some part of your body. And it's either, there's only 4 areas. It's either your head, or your chest, or your hips, or your knees. And each of those has a fancy name as well. And that just builds automatically into a character. We know this kind of character is a superhero. We know that they face danger square on. Whereas this person's in their head, and they're thinking all the time. Yeah, this person's very confident, very cocky. This person's probably Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. You put that right in at the very base level of the character, and then you start to layer in other little mannerisms. So they're either a very solid character in all of one piece and all of one pose, or they're a conflicted character. And so as they're talking to you, something is switching and moving and it's light, and whereas the rest of them is very focused. Or we're doing the thing with the eyes we talked about. They might be blinking a lot, and they're very focused, but you know they're not. You know they're switching their thoughts all the time because they're blinking. So you layer that in, and the way I do anything on a character is to ask questions and then try and find a visual answer for them. So are they happy? Are they sad? How do you show that? Are they tired? How do you show someone's tired? Well, they sag. Yeah. Are they defensive as they're being interviewed? Well, then probably the legs are crossed. Is my leg crossed towards you, blocking them off? That's so we can be private. Or am I actually kind of offended by your questions and I'm actually blocking you off now? Do I do the fig leaf because I'm feeling a little threatened? Or am I back here where I'm feeling really confident? So all that stuff. Do I mirror you so that you and I are actually one because we're in the same pose? All those things you start to layer into a character until it screams all this information without a single word.
The other way that your lack of a fear of failure filters into your work is that you have also embraced new technology. So we have a COFA online group of students who sometimes we never meet, and we communicate with them virtually, and as you've experienced because you're a guest in the program at the moment. It's remarkable that a man who went to art school in the 1980s, before we had computers even in the libraries there, can actually go through a process where you can start with a pencil and then end up within 30 minutes on Photoshop and using all of the tools and techniques and so on there. What do you think is the balance in drawing between the traditional and the new technology?
The new technology is the traditional of the future, so there's no difference. That's plain and simple. Oil paint was the new technology once upon a time. So I love new mediums. I love challenging myself to see what I create in a new medium, and it gives you stuff. You know that. You're a fantastic multimedia artist. And so every time you get a new medium, there's the things you have to learn to make it work. Oils dry slow. Deal with it. You know, watercolor, if you lose the white of your paper, start again. So you're not getting it back. But that restriction is like the poetic rhyme and meter, and you work within that, and that allows you to create different kinds of things. So along comes digital, which is great. It has the ability to change your mind forever. That is its big plus. The detriment is it has the ability to change your mind forever. So suddenly now, you don't have to commit. And if you haven't learned how to commit, you will make a mess. You'll make mush. So you remember that about digital. You learn to deal with that, and then you can get in there and do some amazing things. Amazing. I mean, you saw how fast it was to sit down and actually paint that, but even better to be able to go, oh, and here's how I did that again, and just undo the layers. And remind people we started with a blob, and then we put this on the blob, and then we refined the blob. So it's a great teaching tool, fantastic teaching tool. But it's also not good at everything. Even when you're done, you had to print that. If you hadn't had a printer, we wouldn't be looking at it. So there's no original left behind. That is a detriment of digital.
Iain, you've been very generous with your time. We've had a conversation around creativity and your own processes, about your own management, about how you reflect on what you do and the kind of skills that you use and how you juggle everything. And also what you think is the shift in story, that we need to be wary of the theme park and the roller coaster ride and the artificial high. Iain, I would shake your hand and thanks, but I know that you're a hugger, so thank you very much.